Today, we're diving into one of the most unbelievable true stories from World War II. It's about the largest, most secret warship ever built, and how it was taken down by a single American submarine on its very first trip out to sea. This is a real-life David versus Goliath, playing out on the dark, cold waters of the Pacific. So picture this. It's late 1944. You're inside the American submarine, the USS Archerfish. The air is heavy, thick with the smell of diesel and sweat. Everyone's moving quietly. Voices are low whispers. They've been out here, on patrol, just waiting. And in that moment, the entire ocean just feels tense, like it's holding its breath, because something huge is about to happen. So that's the big question, right? How on earth does one submarine, with a crew of just 80 guys, manage to find and sink a brand new supercarrier that weighs almost 72,000 tons? Well, to figure that out, we need to get to know the two main players in this incredible drama. Okay, first up, let's talk about the hunter, Commander Joseph Enright. This is a man who had something serious to prove. Now, what's so fascinating about Enright is the personal stakes here. See, on a previous command, he'd come back to port without firing a single torpedo. He felt he'd let his crew down so badly that he actually asked to be relieved of command. So this patrol on the Archerfish, this wasn't just another mission for him. This was his one last shot at redemption. He made a promise to himself. This time, he would not hesitate. So there he is, late one night, when this enormous blip just appears on the Archerfish's radar. And this just lays out the insane mismatch perfectly. On one side, you've got this small submarine, this little predator in a massive ocean, led by a commander who's literally haunted by his past. And on the other, an absolute monster of a ship, a secret weapon on its maiden voyage, with thousands of people on board. The hunt was officially on. All right, now let's flip the script and look at the prey, because to really get how this giant fell, you have to understand that the Shinano, well, she was a ship born out of desperation, and she was plagued with problems from the moment she was conceived. First off, just look at that number. Let it sink in. 71,890 tons. The Shinano was originally the hull for what was going to be the third Yamato-class battleship, the biggest battleships ever. But mid-construction, they converted her into the largest aircraft carrier the world had ever seen. On paper, she was a floating fortress, this unsinkable symbol of Japanese power. But as we're about to see, what's on paper is very different from reality. Here's the thing. Japan was losing the war, and the Shinano's construction was incredibly rushed. They were short on skilled workers, quality control was basically thrown out the window, and critical systems like the watertight doors that are supposed to stop flooding, they were never even properly tested. And her crew? A total mix of some veterans and a lot of green recruits who had never, ever trained together as a single unit. This ship was a giant, for sure, but it was a deeply, deeply flawed one. And then there was the curse. During her launch ceremony, the gate of the dry dock actually collapsed. A giant wall of water surged in, slamming this 70,000-ton ship into the concrete walls, killing workers. It was seen as a terrible omen. From that moment on, a lot of her own sailors believed the ship was just doomed, that the sea itself had tried to reject her. Okay, so let's get back to the chase. Commander Enright had a huge problem. His target, the Shinano, was moving at 20 knots. His submarine's top speed? Only 19 knots. He literally couldn't catch it in a straight-up race. So he had to outthink it. And this is where it gets brilliant. Enright basically turned this whole chase into a high-stakes math problem. He knew a ship that big would be zigzagging to avoid subs. So by patiently tracking its movements, he could start to predict its course. That meant he could cut across the corners of its zigzag pattern, slowly, and I mean painstakingly slowly, closing the distance over hours. It was this deadly game of geometry and patience. And then, the Archerfish got a break. A massive stroke of luck. One of the Shinano's propeller shaft bearings, which, remember, was probably installed incorrectly during its rushed construction, started to overheat. The giant carrier had to slow down to 18 knots to keep it from failing completely. That was the moment. That tiny drop in speed was everything Enright needed. Now, the Archerfish wasn't just keeping up, she was gaining on it. After hours and hours of this relentless pursuit, it all comes down to just a few critical moments. The hunter has his prey right where he wants it. It's 3:15 in the morning when the Shinano makes a fateful turn. It steadies its course, and in doing so, presents a perfect, flat, broadside target to the Archerfish. The range was just 1,400 yards. This was it. This was Enright's shot. In under a minute, he fires a spread of 6 torpedoes, sending them slicing through the black water towards the biggest target he had ever laid eyes on. 4 of the 6 torpedoes slam into the side of the carrier. Now, at first, on a ship this enormous, the damage seemed manageable. But the truly shocking part is what happens next. The ship that was supposed to be unsinkable went down in just over 7 hours. It had only been at sea in its entire existence for 17 hours. So why? Why did it sink so fast? Well, it wasn't just the torpedoes. It was every single one of those fatal flaws we talked about, all coming home to roost at once. The watertight doors that were never tested, they failed. The damage control teams that were never properly trained, they had no idea how to stop the flooding. So the water just spread from one compartment to the next in this unstoppable chain reaction. The torpedoes opened the door, but the ship was doomed by its own shoddy construction. The sinking of the Shinano was way more than just a tactical win. Its aftermath really tells you a lot about the state of the war, and it left a huge mark on naval history. Aboard the sinking carrier, the scene was just tragic. As the ship started to roll over, its captain, Toshio Abe, followed the highest tradition of the Navy. He tied himself to the bridge of his ship and chose to go down with his command. And the human cost here is just staggering. Of the more than 2,500 people on board, 1,435 died. The survivors, who were pulled from the water, were then immediately sworn to absolute secrecy by the military. As far as the Japanese public was concerned, the Shinano had never even existed. I mean, the secrecy was so total that when Commander Enright got back to base and reported that he'd sunk a massive aircraft carrier, U.S. intelligence flat out didn't believe him. They had 0 records of a ship like that. It was only after the war was over, when investigators went through Japanese naval records, that the incredible truth finally came out. Enright had sunk the largest warship ever destroyed by a submarine. His redemption was absolute. So when you boil it all down, what does this incredible story really teach us? Well, first, that wars aren't won by single miracle weapons. They're won by the industrial systems that can build and sustain their forces. The Shinano was a marvel, but the system that built her was broken. Second, a ship's real strength isn't its steel armor, it's the training and skill of her crew. And finally, it shows that huge size without reliability isn't just a weakness, it's a fatal flaw. In the end, the Shinano was a magnificent weapon, right? A true marvel of engineering, at least on paper. But the system that built it, that trained its crew, and that sent it to sea, that system was crumbling. The Archerfish, on the other hand, was just a standard submarine, but it was part of a system that valued quality, training, and the grit of its commander. And that, right there, made all the difference. Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What really wins wars?